Most burnout recovery advice tells you to take a vacation, sleep more, set better boundaries, delegate more aggressively. And if you have tried all of those things and still found yourself back in the same place 6 months later, it is not because you lack commitment. It is because those interventions were never designed to address what burnout actually is at the biological level. This video is about what actual burnout recovery looks like for high-performing leaders, not the wellness version, the biological and structural version, the one that addresses what burnout actually is at the physiological level, why the standard advice fails the people who need it most, and what the recovery process actually requires stage by stage. If you are currently in burnout or have been in burnout before and felt yourself sliding back toward it, this video was made for you. The first thing you need to understand is that burnout is not a state, it is a process. And recovery is not an event, it is also a process. That distinction matters enormously because most leaders approach burnout recovery the way they approach every other problem. Identify the issue, apply the solution, and return to full capacity. The reason that approach fails is that burnout does not work on a project timeline. It works on a biological level. Here is what is actually happening in your body when you are in a state of burnout. Your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the system that regulates your stress response, has been running in an elevated state for an extended period. Cortisol, the primary stress hormone, has been chronically elevated to the point where your body has begun down-regulating its own cortisol receptors as a protective mechanism. This is called HPA, axis dysregulation, and it is what creates the paradoxical exhaustion of burnout, where you are simultaneously depleted and unable to fully recover. The system that should be helping you stabilize has itself become dysregulated. A long weekend will not fix this. A vacation will not fix this. Even a month off often does not fix this, which is why so many leaders return from extended leave and find themselves back in the same physiological state within weeks. The HPA axis requires a specific kind of sustained, low-threat environment to recalibrate. And most leaders never create that environment because they do not know that is what biology requires. There are 3 stages of burnout recovery, each requiring a different approach. Moving through them in sequence is not optional. Skipping stages is the primary reason recovery fails. Stage 1 is what I call physiological stabilization. This is the stage most leaders skip entirely because it does not feel productive. It requires genuinely reducing the demand on your nervous system for a sustained period, not just taking breaks within an otherwise unchanged schedule, but making structural reductions to the cognitive and emotional load you are carrying. This means fewer decisions, less context switching, reduced relational complexity, and deliberate periods of genuine non-stimulation every single day. The reason leaders resist this stage is identity. If your sense of worth is tied to your output, reducing output feels like failure. The clinical reality is that physiological stabilization is the prerequisite for everything else. A nervous system that cannot downregulate, cannot learn, cannot integrate, cannot build new patterns. You are trying to renovate a building while it is still on fire. The duration of stage 1 depends on how long you have been in burnout and how severe the dysregulation is. For most high performers who have been running on burnout for 6 months to 2 years, stage 1 requires a minimum of 4 to 8 weeks of genuine load reduction before the nervous system begins to show signs of recalibration. Not 4 to 8 weeks of vacation, 4 to 8 weeks of structurally reduced demand, which is a different thing and a harder thing to create inside a leadership role. Stage 2 is structural redesign. This is where most recovery advice begins, which is why it fails. Once physiological stabilization has created a foundation, stage 2 involves examining the conditions that produce the burnout and making targeted changes to those conditions, not coping strategies layered on top of an unchanged structure, actual structural changes. This is the explore stage of the REST framework applied at depth. What are the specific workload structures that are regenerating your stress response? What are the relational dynamics that are costing you disproportionate emotional energy? What are the organizational patterns that require you to absorb uncertainty that should be distributed across the system? What are the personal beliefs about performance, worth, and renewal that are making it impossible for you to protect the space your nervous system requires? These questions have specific answers for each leader. The answers require honest examination rather than quick fixes. And this is where working with a clinically trained professional becomes not a luxury, but a functional necessity, because the blind spots that allowed burnout to develop in the first place are often the same blind spots that prevent you from seeing what needs to change. Stage 3 is capacity rebuilding. This is the stage that feels most like progress, which is why leaders often try to jump to it first. Rebuilding cognitive sharpness, emotional bandwidth, relational investment, and leadership presence requires that the first two stages have genuinely occurred. When leaders attempt capacity rebuilding on top of an unrecalibrated nervous system, they experience what I call false recovery, a period of apparent improvement followed by a faster and harder collapse back into burnout. The nervous system has not rebuilt its reserves. It has simply been running on the adrenaline of novelty and renewed motivation. That fuel runs out. True capacity rebuilding is gradual, incremental, and nonlinear. You will have good weeks followed by harder weeks. That is not regression. That is the normal pattern of biological recovery. The leaders who recover fully are the ones who understand this and do not respond to a hard week by pushing harder. They respond by returning to the stabilization practices that created the foundation in the first place. Before we go further, go to restleader.com and take the free stress assessment now. It will tell you exactly which stage of the burnout cycle you are currently in and give you a specific targeted starting point for your recovery. Restleader.com. Link is in the description. Burnout recovery is not a solo project. The same culture that produced your burnout will work against your recovery if you attempt it without support. The same beliefs about strength and self-sufficiency that made you successful will become obstacles to the recovery process if they are not examined. And the same capacity for override that allowed you to perform through warning signs will allow you to override your recovery if you are not paying attention. This is not a character flaw. It is a predictable feature of the high performer profile. The qualities that create success in leadership environments are the same qualities that make burnout more likely and recovery harder. Understanding that is not discouraging, it is clarifying. Most leaders who come to this work arrive with the same unspoken question. Is it still possible to lead at the level I want to lead at and not lose myself in the process? The answer is yes. But it requires building a different relationship with your own capacity than the one that brought you to this point. Not less ambition, not less drive, a more honest and more sustainable architecture for expressing that ambition. You did not burn out because you were weak. You burned out because you were operating in conditions that exceeded any human nervous system sustainable capacity, and you did it longer than most people could have. That endurance is real, but it is not a substitute for recovery, and recovery is not a weakness. It is the prerequisite for everything you still want to build. Go to restleader.com, take the assessment, find out exactly where you are in this process. And if this video gave you language for something you have been going through alone, share it with someone who needs to hear that what they are experiencing has a name, a structure, and a path through it. Restleader.com. Link is in the description. This is Dr. Renee Sunday. And talk to you later.